Good morning, students.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
Okay, whether the screen is visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So last class I was discussing about the definition of workman discussed under section 2S of the Industrial Disputes Act 1947. There I have discussed the analysis of the definition. So I have divided the definition into 4 parts. So the first part is a person. So here the person means it includes a person employed in any industry as well as an apprentice, means a trainee. So trainee is also included within the purview of a definition of workman, as well as a person who is employed in an industry. That person is also included within the purview of the definition of section 2S. So next I have discussed the term employed. So while discussing the term employed, I have discussed so many case laws. That is Dharangadara chemical case I have discussed. Next, Chintamana Rao case I have discussed. So, employed means here again there shall be a contract for service. So, I have discussed a contract of and contract for service. So, if a master is having an authority to tell what is to be done and how it is to be done, then there exists a master and servant relationship. And if there is a master and servant relationship, then yes, you can call them as a workman even within the purview of section 2S. So very importantly, I have discussed Standard Vacuum Refining Company case. So where even the same case I have discussed while discussing when individual dispute becomes an industrial dispute. The same case, again, it is a repetition of that case. So where the working class, where the regular workmen are having a community of interest or substantial interest in a particular cause. It may be related to the employment, it may be related to the non-employment or terms of employment or conditions of labor, then those people will covered within the purview of the term workman. So next part of the definition is nature of work. See, already in definition itself, they have provided what kind of a nature of work, that is manual, skilled, unskilled, supervisory, technically, etc. And the last one is hire and fire. Either there is a payment of compensation or there is something given in return for the labor of a particular fellow that comes within the purview of hire and reward. And the last part of the definition talks about the exception. The exemption from the definition of section 2S means the people who are not included within the purview of section 2S, and if they are not included within the purview of section 2S, they are not regulated by Industrial Disputes Act 1947. They will not get remedy under this particular law. Such types of persons are the person who are regulated by Army Act, Air Force Act, Navy Act, the persons employed in police services, prison authority, the persons who are having a duty, that is mainly they are employed in managerial or administrative capacity, and the person who is employed in supervisory capacity and draws a salary exceeding 10,000 rupees. So these are the 4 category of people who are exempted from the definition of workmen, and they are exempted from even the benefits which are provided by this particular legislation. Why? Because for all these things, for all these 4 categories, we are having a separate legislations. We are having a separate legislations. So for that reason, they will get a remedy under those legislations. So here they are exempted from this particular definition. So with this, I'm going to wind up the important definition, even from the examination point of view, the definition of workman. And today I'm going to discuss again an important chapter from the examination point of view, that is authorities under the Act. See, basically, there are 6 authorities under this particular legislation. One is the Works Committee, Conciliation Officer, Board of Conciliation, Court of Inquiry, Voluntary Arbitration, and Adjudication. So these are the 6 authorities which are provided under this particular legislation. But from the examination point of view, there are only 2 important authorities which are repeatedly asked in your examination. One is the conciliation officer, and second one is the adjudicatory mechanism provided under this particular legislation. So I'm going to discuss everything, but the mainly I'm going to focus on these 2 important definitions, because in detail I'm going to discuss these 2 authorities. One is the conciliation officer, and second one is adjudicatory authorities under this particular legislation. So adjudicatory authorities are again 3. One is the labor court, industrial tribunal, and a national tribunal. Okay, that I'm going to discuss in detail. And one more authority is conciliation officer, because repeatedly in your examination on these two topics, there is a damn sure question. Either they will ask a conciliation officer or they will ask a adjudicatory mechanism. So all others, again, I am going to discuss for the sake of your knowledge. Okay. So the first authority provided under this particular legislation is Works Committee. Under section 3. Under section 3, it is the Works Committee. Now the question comes, what is this Works Committee and when it is mandatory to constitute a Works Committee in an industry? See, dear students, we have discussed the definition of industry and even the authorities provided under this particular law, that is the Works Committee. It is again indeed essential to this particular authority is mandatory only in case of establishments which are covered within the definition of section 2J. Means if you want to constitute a Works Committee, your establishment, your undertaking, your manufacturing process should be an industry covered under section 2G of the Industrial Disputes Act 1947. Now the question comes, when this particular committee is mandatory, is it mandatory or directory? There are two questions. Basically, this particular committee, that is Works Committee, can you find it in every establishment? The answer is no. This particular constitution of Works Committee is mandatory only in an establishment, only in an undertaking, only in a manufacturing process which is having 100 or more than 100 workmen employed in any industry preceding 12 months. I mean to say, if a particular employer is employing 100 workmen, then only the constitution of a Works Committee is mandatory. If he is employing 50 workmen, then it is not mandatory on the part of the employer to constitute a Works Committee. Now the question comes, who will order for its constitution? Is it the employer or is it the government? It is the government. It is not the local government. It is appropriate government. The appropriate government is having a power to order the employer for the constitution of a Works Committee. Now, the order is made to whom? The order is made to the employer. Okay. Employer, again, employer means it may be a chairman, he may be an occupier in certain establishment. Specifically, if you look into the factories, usually the whole and sole authority will be in the hands of occupier. Okay. So, the employer is under a duty. The government is going to order for the employer. Now, who will be there in this Works Committee? The equal representation of both employers and employees. See, if two people are from employers, then two people you have to choose it from the employee side. So, two from employer and two from a working class, or three from an employer and three from a working class. So, with these equal representation, we are going to constitute a committee which is called as a Works Committee. Okay. Once again, I repeat, when it is mandatory to constitute a Works Committee, it is not mandatory for all the establishment. The establishments which are having 100 or more than 100 working class in any day preceding 12 months, for those establishments only, constitution of a Works Committee is mandatory. Who will order for its constitution? It is the appropriate government. To whom it will order? To the employer. And who will be there in this Works Committee? It is totally the equal representation. They have maintained the equality status according to your Article 14. Equal representation of both employers as well as employee. Okay. So, with these equal representations, we are going to constitute the Works Committee under section 3 of this particular legislation. Now, for what purpose? What is the purpose for which this Works Committee is being constituted? That is discussed under subsection 2 of section 3. There are two important purposes. One is to comment upon the matters of common interest between the employers and workmen, with a view to promote measures for securing and preserving amity and good relationship between the working class as well as the employers class. So, this is a one function, and second one is to control any material differences between the employer and employee which is of a common interest. See, one is the controlling and second one is the commenting. Only these are the two important functions of the works committee. I have given you the example of, while discussing the definition of industrial dispute, I have given you the example of if a dispute is related to the employment, non-employment, terms of employment or conditions of labor, then only it is an industrial dispute and then only the labor court are having a jurisdiction to try your matter. But if you are having an individual interest, if you are having a material difference, I have given you the example of newspaper. Since so many are from Kannada medium, if your employer is not ready to bring or if he is not ordering for a Kannada newspaper, then the dispute between you and your employer with regard to newspaper, that is of a common interest. It is a material difference, but still it is not an industrial dispute. And the things which are not industrial dispute, the subjects which are not covered within the purview of an industrial dispute, that subjects are being discussed. That subjects are being commented, that subjects are being controlled by the works committee. See, again, I repeat, the works committee is not an adjudicatory authority. What it can do is, it can control the differences and it can comment upon. Only it can give suggestions to the employers as well as employee. It is not at all an adjudicatory authority. So with these two purposes, one is commenting and second one is controlling. With these two purposes, the works committee was being established. Okay, these are the two important functions. Now, what is the experience of a works committee? If we analyze with the practical experience, if we analyze the experience of a works committee, we come to the conclusion that there are some what you call points which contributed to the success of works committee, as well as there are some points which contributed to the failure of a works committee in the establishment. So one is existence of cooperation, existence of cordial relation between the workers, management and a trade union. So when there is an existence of cooperation between these three categories of people, working class, management as well as the trade union, then the works committee will work properly. Means there are no disputes, there are no any kind of a material disputes. Okay, so this is one reason where we come across, this is a basic reason where we come across there is a success on the part of a works committee. And failure is, though at the ground level the works committee solves so many problems, the works committee solves material problems, but the work of a works committee is not being appreciated either by the working class or by the management class. Working class means even it includes a trade union. So trade union will also not appreciate the work of a works committee, as well as the management will also not appreciate the what you call the work of a works committee. And one more reason is lack of knowledge, illiteracy, lack of understanding between the workers, between the management and workers. Okay, this is also a kind of lacuna, hurdle for the failure of works committee in majority of the establishment. Now coming to the resolution. See, according to Rule 57 of Industrial Disputes, the Central Rules of 1957, it empowers the authority to whom the power under Section 3, it means the appropriate government is having a duty or it is empowered to dissolve the works committee. If it is of no use, then even you can go for dissolution of a works committee. It is like you are winding up of a company. So in accordance with the rules, if 2/3 numbers of representatives of a workman with reasonable justifications, if they want to dissolve the works committee, then they can do it under Rule 57 of this particular legislation. So with this, I'm going to wind up the works committee. This is not important, but for the sake of knowledge, I'm going to discuss. And Kannada medium students, works committee ಅನ್ನುವಂತ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾಧಿಕಾರ, ವರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಕಮಿಟಿ ಪ್ರಾಧಿಕಾರವನ್ನ ಯಾರು ನೇಮಕಾತಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾವ ಎಸ್ಟಾಬ್ಲಿಷ್ಮೆಂಟ್ 100 ಅಥವಾ 100ಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ಹೊಂದಿರಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರ ಮಾತ್ರ ಈ ಕಮಿಟಿಯನ್ನ ನೇಮಕಾತಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಥವಾ ಈ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾಧಿಕಾರವನ್ನ ನೇಮಕಾತಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಓಕೆ, ಇದನ್ನ ನೇಮಕಾತಿ ಮಾಡೋ ಅಂತ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾರು ಆರ್ಡರ್ ಆದೇಶವನ್ನ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಪ್ರೋಪ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ಸೂಕ್ತ ಸರ್ಕಾರ. ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರ್ರಿ? ಮಾಲೀಕನಿಗೂ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರು. ಸೊ ಇದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರ್ಯಾರು ಇರ್ತಾರಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈಕ್ವಲ್ ರಿಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟೇಷನ್. 2 ಜನ ಮಾಲೀಕರಿದ್ರಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ 2 ಜನ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ತಗೋಬೇಕು, 4 ಜನ ಮಾಲೀಕರಿದ್ರಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ 4 ಜನ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕರನ್ನ ಒಳಗೊಂಡು ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಮಿಟಿ ರೆಡಿ ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಇನ್ನು ಈ ಕಮಿಟಿಯ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಏನಪ್ಪಾ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬರೀ ಕಾಮೆಂಟಿಂಗ್, ಹೇಳಿಕೆ, ಅವ್ರು ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾದಂತಹ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮೇಲೆ ದಬ್ಬಾಳಿಕೆಯನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬರಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಥವಾ ಅಡ್ಜುಡಿಕೇಟರ್ ನ್ಯಾಯ ವಿತರಣೆ ಮಾಡುವಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಅಧಿಕಾರ ವ್ಯಾಪ್ತಿಯನ್ನ ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಮಿಟಿ ಹೊಂದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಅದೇ ನಿಟ್ಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಸಕ್ಸಸ್ಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಕಾರಣಗಳದಾವು ಮತ್ತು ಫೇಲ್ಯೂರ್ಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಕಾರಣಗಳದಾವು. ಮತ್ತು ರೂಲ್ 57ರ ಪ್ರಕಾರ ನಿಮಗೆ ವರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಕಮಿಟಿ ಬ್ಯಾಡ್ ಆಗಿತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನೀವೇನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದ್ರಿ, ಅಪ್ರಾಪ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಗವರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ರಿಕ್ವೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ ನಿಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುವಂತಹ ವರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಕಮಿಟಿಯನ್ನ ತೆಗೆದು ಹಾಕ್ಬೋದು. ಓಕೆ, ದಿಸ್ ಇಸ್ ಆಲ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ವಾಟ್ ಯು ಕಾಲ್ the works committee. Next, very important from the examination point of view is conciliation officer. Okay, see, conciliation officer is discussed under section 2D of the Industrial Disputes Act. So according to section 2D, conciliation officer means an officer appointed under this act. Conciliation officer means an officer appointed under this act. Again, conciliation proceedings means any proceedings which is held by the conciliation officer or board of the conciliation under this particular legislation. So for that, we will call it as a conciliation proceedings. Okay. See, under section 4 of this particular legislation, it provides for appointment of a conciliation officer. The meaning of a conciliation officer is discussed under section 2D, but appointment is discussed under section 4 of this particular legislation. Now the question comes, who will appoint the conciliation officer? Again, it is by the appropriate government. Appropriate government means, again, it may be a state government or it may be a central government. Appropriate government, how it will appoint? Appropriate government by notification in the official gazette. I repeat, appropriate government by notification in the official gazette, it may appoint such number of persons as it deem fit. It may appoint 1 officer, it may appoint 2 officer, it may appoint 4 officer. So as it necessary, as it deem fit. Okay, whenever it is necessary to go for more than 1, yes, they can go for more than 1. That is the conciliation officers. Okay, and what is the duty? The duty of a conciliation officer is he is charged with the duty of mediating in and promoting the settlement of industrial disputes. See, here you have to understand the difference. In works committee is not at all having a power to discuss or decide or mediate the industrial dispute, whereas the conciliation officer is having a duty. He is having a duty of mediating in and promote the settlement of industrial dispute. I mean to say that if there is an individual dispute cannot be discussed, cannot be settled before the conciliation officer. Only if it is industrial dispute. Industrial dispute means, again, if it is related to the employment, non-employment, terms of employment or conditions of labor, then only the what you call the conciliation officer is having a power to mediate in and promote the settlement. So this is all about section 4. Section 4 talks about the appointment. So conciliation officer may be appointed for a specific area or specific industry in a specific area, or for one or more specified industry, either permanently or for a limited period. Okay. See, for example, take the example of our Belgaum only. So in Belgaum, yes, the labor commissioner will be discharged with the power of conciliation officer. Or before what you call 2018, if I'm not wrong, even the conciliation officer was appointed by zonal wise. In Hubballi, we are having a labor court, and even in Hubballi, we are having a conciliation officer. Conciliation officer is appointed zonal wise, means more than one district or more than one zone, or he may be appointed for a specific industry. It depends upon the number of industrial disputes. It depends upon the number of industrial disputes. The appointing authority, the government will appoint 1 or more than 1 conciliation officer. So this is about section 4. Okay. Now, powers and procedure. So the powers of these conciliation officer are discussed under section 11.2 and 11.4. Subsection 2 of section 11 and subsection 4 of section 11 talks about the 2 important powers of a conciliation officer. So the first power is to enter the premises. The first power of a conciliation officer is to enter the premises. That is discussed under 11.2. The conciliation officer is vested with the power to enter the premises occupied by any establishment to which the dispute relates. This is very important. Without the existence of a dispute, the conciliation officer is not at all having a power under section 11. If he want to exercise the power under section 11, then either there shall be an existence of an industrial dispute or there shall be an apprehension of industrial dispute. So under these situations, he is having a power to enter the premises occupied by the establishment to which the dispute relates. This is very important. So whenever there is the existence of a dispute or apprehension of an industrial dispute, yes, the conciliation officer is having a power to enter the premises for the purpose of inquiry. For the purpose of inquiry into that dispute, yes, he can have an entrance in that particular establishment. But there is one rule. There is a rule that before giving an entry, he has to give a prior notice. He has to give a prior notice to the employer that I'm going to visit your establishment. That is directory. It is not mandatory. The conciliation officer has to give a prior notice, reasonable notice. So according to you, reasonable notice, it may be 1 month or it may be 2 months. That is called as a reasonable notice. But without reasonable notice, sometimes if there is an emergency, if there is a necessity, without giving a prior notice or prior intimation, if the conciliation officer enters the premises and after entering the premises, if the settlement is arrived at, see, the rule is that you have to give a prior notice to the employer that I am so and so, I am coming to your establishment to settle your matter, or for the sake of inquiry I am coming. Okay, if there are certain situations where the conciliation officer has not given a notice, sudden enough he has visited your establishment, he has held a conciliation proceedings, and in that conciliation proceedings, if there is a settlement means if you come to the compromise, if the employer and employee come to the compromise, he has mediated, and after mediation, if there is a settlement, the employer cannot challenge that settlement by taking a defense that the conciliation officer has not given a notice, because giving a notice is not mandatory. Giving a notice is not mandatory, it is directory. Okay, so after giving a notice, after reasonable notice, he has to enter the premises. But there are in case of emergency, in case of necessity, if he enters the premises and if he arrives at a settlement, that settlement is valid in the eyes of law. Absence of notice does not affect the jurisdiction of a conciliation officer. Without notice also, he can go for settling your dispute. So this is the first power of a conciliation officer. Kannada medium students conciliation officer na first ಏನಪ್ಪಾ ಅಂತಂದ್ರ ಪವರ್ ಏನಪ್ಪಾ ಅಂತಂದ್ರ ಅವ ಎಸ್ಟಾಬ್ಲಿಷ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಎಂಟ್ರಿ ಹೊಡೆದು ಎಸ್ಟಾಬ್ಲಿಷ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ವಿಸಿಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಆ ವಿಸಿಟ್ ದಲ್ಲಿ ಆತ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ವಿವಾದವನ್ನ ಇತ್ಯರ್ಥ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. ವಿವಾದ ಇತ್ಯರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆತ ಸಂಧಾನವನ್ನ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು ಹೊರತಾಗಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾದಂತಹ ನ್ಯಾಯ ನಿರ್ಣಾಯಕ ಪ್ರಾಧಿಕಾರವನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿರುವುದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸಂಧಾನದ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಆತ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮನವೊಲಿಸಿ, ನಿಮಗೆ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಏನಪ್ಪಾ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಳಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮನವೊಲಿಸಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ಸಂಧಾನವನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನೋಟಿಸ್ ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕಂತ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೇಳ್ತಿರಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ನೋಟಿಸ್ ಕೊಡ್ಲಿಲ್ಲಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದ್ ವೇಳೆ ಸಂಧಾನ ಆಗಿತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರ ಆ ಸಂಧಾನವು ಸಿಂಧುತ್ವವನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿರುತ್ತದೆ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಇನ್ವ್ಯಾಲಿಡ್. ಸಿಂಧುತ್ವವನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿರುತ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡ ಕಲಂ 11ರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಇನ್ ಎರಡನೇ ಪವರ್ ಯಾವ್ದಪ್ಪ ಅಂದ್ರ ಟು ಎಕ್ಸಾಮೈನ್ ಎನಿ ಪರ್ಸನ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಟು ಇನ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಎನಿ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್. Say after giving a visit for the sake of investigation, what he has to do for the sake of settlement? After giving a notice, he has to visit the establishment for the sake of investigation, and while investigation he needs to verify certain documents which are connected with the industrial dispute. He need to inspect or he need to examine certain people, usually the working class as well as the employers class, in order to have a clarity on the facts of the dispute, in order to have a clarity on the principle which is laid down in the industrial dispute, whether it is exactly, whether it is connected to the employment, non-employment, terms of employment, what exactly the dispute is, what are the parties, what is their demand, and why the employer is what you call giving a rejection. So all those things, for all those things, in order to examine, in order to investigation, or in order to inquire into the industrial dispute, he needs to examine the people, and even he needs to inspect the document. See, for the purpose of examination, for the purpose of inspecting the document must be connected with the industrial dispute. It is not like your audit report. He is not having a power of chartered accountant. He is not supposed to what you call verify all the documents of establishment. He is only vested with the power to verify the documents which are related to the present industrial dispute. It is not a past industrial dispute. It is related to the present industrial dispute in hand, for which he has given a visit. For the sake of inquiry, he can verify the document, he can what you call examine the people, and if he feels that verifying the document as well as examining the people, if it is essential for the purpose of implementing the award or for the purpose of carrying out his functions which are provided by the law. Okay, for the sake of investigation, if he feels that yes, this document is relevant, yes, this person witness is relevant, or this person's statement is relevant. So for that, for the sake of what you call mediation, what else is essential, what else is needed, he can go for investigating as well as he can go for inspecting all the documents. But again, he should keep in mind that that document must be related to the industrial dispute which is in hand. That is very important. Okay, and these are the two what you call powers, and while exercising the power under this particular section, that is section 11.4, he will exercise all the powers of a civil court. Hope you know what are the powers of a civil court. He can ask the people for Gita oath, cross examination, examination in chief, okay, evidence, power of search and seizure. So every power of a civil court are being vested in the hands of a conciliation officer while exercising the power under section 11 clause 4. So these are the two powers of a conciliation officer. Next, duties. See, there are importantly 4 duties of a conciliation officer. Okay, the first duty is discussed under section 12.1. Okay, according to section 12.1, the first duty, the first and foremost duty, the primary duty of a conciliation officer is to hold the conciliation proceedings. What is his primary duty? Like your attendance, 75% attendance is primary. Okay, that is a primary duty of every law student. Like your attendance, here also the duty of a conciliation officer, the first duty of a conciliation officer is holding a conciliation proceedings. Now the question comes, when he has to hold the conciliation proceedings, again there is a dependency. When he has to hold a conciliation proceedings, can he hold a conciliation proceedings? If there is an individual dispute, the answer is no. If there is an existence of an industrial dispute, I repeat, if there is an existence of an industrial dispute, or if there is an apprehension of industrial dispute, if there is an existence of industrial dispute or apprehension of industrial dispute, then it is a duty on the part of a conciliation officer to hold the conciliation proceedings. Now again the question comes whether holding of a conciliation proceedings is mandatory on the part of a conciliation officer. The answer is no, because if you go by subsection 1 subclause 1 of section 12, it uses the term may. May means again it is a discretionary. Okay, conciliation officer may hold the conciliation proceedings. Okay, conciliation officer may hold the conciliation proceedings whenever there is the existence of an industrial dispute or apprehension of industrial dispute. Okay, but Even after may also, there is one mandatory duty on the part of a cancellation officer. Holding, see I repeat, holding of a cancellation proceedings is directory. It is not mandatory. It is purely discretionary. He may hold, cancellation officer may hold his cancellation proceedings in a prescribed manner whenever there is an existence of an industrial dispute or apprehension of an industrial dispute in case of public utility services. In case of public utility services. And in case of non-public utility services. In case of non-public utility services, it is purely directory. He may hold, he may not hold. Once again, I repeat, there are two what you call services. One is public utility services and second one is non-public utility services. What is this public utility? Public utility services means which are there to serve the public, which are regulated by the government, which are funded by the government. I have given an example of railway, telephone authority, okay, KSRTC, which are run purely for the sake of public. All those establishments, all those undertakings are considered as a public utility services. And in case of public utility services, in case of public utility services also, it is directory, except in one situation. What is that situation? In case of public utility services, if the workers of that establishment have given a notice of strike under section 22, then it is mandatory for the cancellation officer to hold the cancellation proceedings. If you go by interpreting the language of section 12, it gives the meaning that in case of PUS also, in case of public utility services also, it is directory. He may hold or he may not hold. It is his discretion. Okay. But when it is mandatory when the workers of that PUS, you can take the example of KSRTC. The workers of KSRTC, they have given a notice of strike to the government. They have given a notice of strike to the public. Under section 22 only they have given. So when the working class, they give a notice of strike, then it is mandatory without any exception. It is a duty, though the word may is used, though there is a discretionary, but still the discretionary will be interpreted as a mandatory. The directory will be interpreted as a mandatory. When the notice under section 22 has been given by the working class. This is very important. Okay. When a notice of strike has been given in case of PUS, then it is mandatory on the part of a cancellation officer to hold the cancellation proceedings in a prescribed manner. And he has to report. He has to report to the appropriate government. Once again, I repeat. In case of PUS, in case of non-PUS, it is discretionary. But in case of PUS, in case of public utility services, if a notice of strike has been given, under section 22, then it is mandatory on the part of the cancellation officer to hold the cancellation proceedings. Okay, it is mandatory. It is purely mandatory. Without any exception, he has to hold the cancellation proceedings and he has to report it to the government. He has to report it to the government, whether it may be a settlement or it may be a failure report. Okay, during the course of cancellation, during the process of cancellation, while holding a cancellation proceedings, if a parties arrive at a settlement, then he has to submit that settlement report to the government. If the parties don't agree, then he has to submit the failure report to the appropriate government. Okay, this is a rule. Okay, so this is the first duty, holding of a cancellation proceeding. In case of PUS, mandatory. When mandatory? When 22, when notice of strike is being given, then it is mandatory. Okay. And in case of non-PUS, if there is an application by the parties to the dispute, if there is an application means the working class as well as the employer's class, if they request the cancellation officer, then he may hold the cancellation proceedings in case of non-PUS. But in case of PUS, it is a primary duty when the notice of strike under section 22 has been given. Okay. And while exercising this particular power, The functions of conciliation officer, they are not judicial or quasi-judicial. They are purely mediator, because here the conciliation officer is not at all adjudicatory authority, and the conciliation officer's power, the conciliation officer's duty are administrative in nature. They are not judicial in nature. They are not a judicial or quasi-judicial according to your section 195 1C of the CRPC. Okay, they are purely administrative in nature. And second duty is investigation, expeditious investigation of the dispute. So this is again an important duty. For the sake of investigation, without any delay, he has to investigate the dispute and all matters which are affecting the merits and right settlement of the dispute. So the second duty is, after what you call holding a conciliation proceedings, if he needs some what you call inquiry, for the sake of inquiry, for giving a right settlement, for finding out the matters which are affecting the merits of the case, he can go for investigating the dispute. Third, clause 3 of section 12 talks about settlement in the course of conciliation proceedings. See, already have discussed. First one is holding of a conciliation proceedings, when it is mandatory and when it is directory. When it is mandatory, can anybody tell me? Holding of a conciliation proceedings, when it is mandatory?
And notice by public utility services is given under section 22.
Okay. When a notice of strike is given under section 22, then only it is mandatory, otherwise it is discretionary. And in case of non-PUS, application by the parties. In two situations, it is mandatory, otherwise it is directory. Okay. Conciliation officer, he is what you call holding his conciliation proceedings. For that, if he requires any materials, documents, he can go for investigation, investigating the matters which are affecting the right settlement of the dispute, the merits of the dispute, then he can go for investigation. The third point is subsection 3 talks about settlement. If a settlement is arrived in the course of conciliation proceedings, then what he has to do? It is obligatory. According to subsection 3 of section 12, it is obligatory upon the conciliation officer to send a settlement report to the appropriate government. Why? Because he is being appointed by the appropriate government. He is casted with the duty of settlement and he has to intimate to the appropriate government. Can anybody tell me why he has to intimate to the appropriate government? Can you apply your mind? Can you apply your mind? Why he has to intimate to the appropriate government? It may be a settlement or it may be a failure. You can take the example of KSRTC because it is a live example.
Government will take a decision. Government will take a decision whether to refer the matter to the industrial dispute.
Yes, very good, sir. See, government, it is indeed essential for the government to take a decision. Yes, this is one reason. One more reason. I have told you in the class. Can anybody tell me one more reason? If it is settlement, then government need not worry about the dispute. If there is a failure, then again the government has to go for some other what you call authority. It may be adjudicatory or it may be a board of conciliation. Okay. So for that reason, yes, it is indeed essential to have a knowledge about that dispute. One more reason is during the pendency of your dispute before the conciliation officer, the working class cannot go for strike. I repeat, during the pendency of a dispute before the conciliation officer, the workers cannot go for a strike. I have given the example of strike of KSRTC workers. 14 days, the time provided to the conciliation officer for deciding the matter for what you call settling the dispute is 14 days, 1-4, it is not 40, 1-4. Within that 14 days, he has to struggle hard. He has to make an investigation. He has to what you call examine the witnesses. He has to inspect all the documents. So he can do anything. He can do anything by exercising all the powers of a civil court. He can go for search and seizure. He can inspect all the documents which are connected with the industrial dispute. But after doing all these exercises, there is an end of the show by 14 days. After 14 days, he has to submit the failure report to the government. Or within 14 days, if he has struggled hard to make a settlement, and if during the course of conciliation proceedings, if the parties come to a settlement, then he has to submit the settlement report to the appropriate government. This is all about subsection 3. Subsection 3 talks about settlement arrived in the course of conciliation proceedings. If a settlement arrived in the course of conciliation proceedings, then it is obligatory upon the conciliation officer to send the report to the government. Which report? Settlement report to the government. And according to Rule 58, the report should be sent in Form H. There is a Form H which is annexed in your barrack. In that, what you call Form H only, he has to submit that settlement report. He has to prescribe the mode and manner, how he has got that settlement, what are the points of demand, what are the points from employer side as well as the employee side, he has to mention, and he has to send with taking a signature of all the parties. He has to sign over that settlement copy, and he has to submit that settlement report to the appropriate government under subsection 3 of section 3. This is one duty. Next, subsection 4 of section 12 talks about failure report. 3 talks about settlement report. 4 talks about failure report. See, under subsection 4 of section 12, the conciliation officer, as soon as practicable. See, the act has not defined what do you mean by as soon as practicable. It is like your reasonable time. What is that reasonable time? Even nobody knows. Okay. It may be, I have discussed while discussing the industrial dispute, I have given you the example of the reasonable time of appropriate government. So for appropriate government, 18 years may be a reasonable time. As soon as practicable, we don't know what is this as soon as practicable. Okay, so after failure of a conciliation proceedings, as soon as practicable, it is a duty on the part of a conciliation officer to submit the failure report, to the appropriate government. See, here in case of conciliation officer, there is a time bound. What is the timing? 14 days. So as soon as practicable, after 14 days, he has to submit that failure report to the appropriate government. Now, what this report should contain? The first point in your report should be the steps taken by you. You means the conciliation officer. The steps taken by the conciliation officer for ascertaining the facts and circumstances relating to the industrial dispute. What he did in order to ascertain the facts from the people, in order to ascertain the exact facts from the working class, exact facts from the employer's class. So all those things he has to mention in failure report. Second, the steps taken by the conciliation officer to bring about a settlement of a dispute. What is his struggle, he has to mention in second point. Third point, a full statement of facts and circumstances relating to the disputes and steps taken by the conciliation officer to bring about its settlement. So it is a consolidating report of point number 1 and 2 that should become under point number 3. And the last very important is the reason on account of which the parties could not arrive at a settlement. What is that reason? What is the crux of the issue which has mandated the parties not to go for a settlement before a conciliation officer? What was that reason? What was that strong reason? Maybe connected with the employment, non-employment, terms of employment or conditions of labor, that he has to mention. What is the reason for which the parties couldn't arrive at a settlement before him? The parties couldn't arrive at a settlement before the conciliation officer. That should be there. With these 4 points, yes, it is a completion of which report? Failure report. And that failure report should be submitted to whom? It should be submitted to the appropriate government. Okay. So this is about subsection 4 of section 12. Now coming to the period for submission of the report. As I have told you, there are 2 reports. One is the settlement report and second one is the failure report. Okay. According to subsection 6 of section 12, it prescribes a period for submission of a reports. Usually, if it is a settlement report, then 14 days or such shorter period as may be fixed by the appropriate government. If it is a matter of emergency, like your KSRTC, because the strike of KSRTC, it has what you call occurred so much inconvenience on the part of a public. So in case of emergency, the government will wait for 14 days. If it is not that necessity, then government is having a discretionary power to provide some more time in the hands of conciliation officer. But rule says that within 14 days, he has to submit the failure report or else a settlement report to the appropriate government. Okay. But again, under subsection 6, it says that 14 days timing, it is not mandatory. It is direct. Okay, it is not mandatory. With reasonable grounds. If a conciliation officer feels that there are imminent chances of going for a settlement, he may seek some more time from the appropriate government. Okay, and this is a period for settlement of submitting the report. Submitting a settlement report as well as failure report to the appropriate government. Now, the last point under conciliation officer is validity of the settlement arrived at after the prescribed period. See, I have given the prescribed period is 14 days. If with the struggle of the conciliation officer, if parties arrived at a settlement even after the said period, then whether the particular settlement is valid in the eyes of law? Yes, it is valid in the eyes of law according to section 9 clause 2. Subsection 2 of section 9 says that no settlement arrived at in the course of conciliation proceedings before a conciliation officer shall be invalid by reason only of the fact that the settlement was arrived at after the expiry of a period referred in under section 12 clause 6. So 12 clause 6 talks about 14 days time. But if parties the conciliation officer has made a settlement after 14 days, that is also valid in the eyes of law. That comes within the purview of section 9 clause 2. Okay. Even by seeking a permission from the appropriate government, even he can go for extending his what you call timing for a settlement of a dispute. But normally it is only the 14 days. 14 days you should remember, because 14 days it is indeed essential while discussing the topic of strike. Because 14 days, within 14 days, though you have given a notice of strike, within 14 days, you cannot go for a strike. Even it may be an emergency. Even in case of emergency also, you cannot declare a strike. So dear students, with this, I'm going to wind up the authority, which is very, very important from the examination point of view, conciliation officer. Once again, I just brief of conciliation officer is discussed under section 2D. Meaning of definition of section 2D says that an officer appointed under this act is called as conciliation officer, and the proceedings which are held by this officer are called as conciliation proceedings. Now, who will appoint a conciliation officer? It is the appropriate government. How? By notification in the official gazette, appropriate government will appoint a person as a conciliation officer. How many conciliation officers will be appointed? It is a discretionary power of the appropriate government. They may go for one, they may go for more than one. He may be appointed for a specific industry, or he may be appointed for a specified area, or so many specified areas. It depends. It depends upon the discretionary power of the appropriate government. Now, powers, two important powers. One is enter the premises, and second one is examining the person and inspecting the documents. And lastly, duties. So the first primary duty is holding the conciliation office proceedings. So when it is mandatory and when it is directly, I have discussed. So in case of PUS and the notice of strike is given, it is mandatory. And in case of non-PUS, application by the parties, it is mandatory. Otherwise, it is purely directory. He may hold or he may not hold. Next, second one is investigation of the dispute. As I have discussed, for the sake of investigation, he can enter the premises. So investigation, it is both power as well as a duty. He can go for examining the person. He can go for investigating or inspecting the documents. And while exercising this duty also, he will exercise all the powers of a civil court. Next one is settlement arrived in the course of conciliation proceeding. So if a settlement is arrived in the course of conciliation proceedings, then it is a duty on the part of a conciliation officer to send that settlement copy to the appropriate government, which is beneficial both to the employee as well as to the government. Okay. Next one is reporting the failure report. So failure report, it should contain 4 important points. One is a steps taken by the conciliation officer in order to ascertain the facts of the case. Second, what are the steps taken by the conciliation officer for making a settlement or for arriving at a settlement. Third one is, it is a consolidated report of first and 2 point. And the last one is the reason for which the settlement couldn't be arrived at during the course of conciliation proceedings. So that should be the last important point. It should be there. It is the strongest reason for which the parties couldn't arrive at a settlement. If you look into the decision of, if you look into the KSRTC conciliation proceedings, the strong reason was, there were so many strong reasons. They want their hike of a salary, 6th pay commission. There are so many reasons. There were so many points on which they couldn't arrive at a settlement before the conciliation officer. Okay. So after these reports, he has to submit a failure report to the appropriate government so that the appropriate government may think, it may refer that dispute to the adjudicatory mechanism. And the last one is period of submission of a report. So what is the time? The time is 14 days, but with the permission of the appropriate government, he may extend that particular timing, that is 14 days time. And the last very important point, validity of a settlement arrived at after the prescribed period, means after 14 days. It is valid in the eyes of law according to section 9 clause 2. So with this, I'm going to wind up the conciliation officer. If you are having any doubt, regarding this, you can ask. If you are having any doubt regarding the conciliation officer, please do ask.
Madam, when the reconciliation failure report is submitted to the government,
Yes, sir.
it is as good as a failure of it is failure only.
Yes.
They can go on strike, after giving a notice.
After giving a notice, 14 days you cannot go, sir. 14 days you have to wait.
No, 14 days, only when the report is
No,
submitted.
report is submitted, you can go for strike.
Because it cannot be
But
treated
after
as
submitting your report, if the government has referred that dispute to the adjudicatory mechanism, again you cannot go for strike.
although it will not be treated as a pending before the reconciliation officer.
No, sir. It is not recognized as pending before the conciliation, but it will be recognized as a pending before the adjudicatory mechanism.
Oh,
See, after submitting the failure report and before the reference of your dispute to the adjudicatory mechanism, you can go for strike. But once the government has referred your dispute to the adjudicatory mechanism, again you cannot go for a strike. Okay.
Okay.
Any other doubts? Cleared with the concept? Okay, so tomorrow I'm going to discuss Board of Conciliation and all other authorities. See, by August 15, not August 15, by August 10, I have to complete my labor law syllabus because the last working day of this particular semester is August 21. You may have your exams after August 21. So for that reason, it is my duty to complete your syllabus by August 10. So I'm going on, since it is a second gear, if I'm not wrong, I'm going on second gear. Now I have to put fourth gear. So the topics which are so important, I'm going to discuss in detail. The topics which are not so important, I'm going to, I'm not giving much importance to those topics. For the sake of understanding, I will discuss those topics. Okay. The topics which are indeed essential and important from the examination point of view, I'm going to discuss it in detail, like your conciliation officer. Because conciliation officer, they have asked for a short note and even they have asked for a long note. So this is very important topic from the examination point of view. And one more thing I want to discuss with regard to your exams, with regard to your internal test. See, I have given you the question paper and that is the final question paper. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
That is the final question paper. And from part A, you have to write one long note. Part A, you have to write one long note. Either you may attempt that industrial dispute or registration procedure. It is your wish. Okay. On part B, yes.
That is a short note you have written.
Let me explain, sir. From part 1, you have to write one question. It is for 4 marks. And from part B, I have given 4 questions. Out of that, you have to write 2. Okay. And 2 questions are for 3 marks. So part B, it contains 6 and part A contains 4 marks. So total how many marks? 10 marks. Okay. That you should remember. So you are writing the exam only for 10 marks, not 100 marks. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
In labor law, you can take white sheets, ruled sheets. Okay. But according to what you call the rule of test committee, it should be what you call plain paper. There are some students who don't want to write in plain sheets. They can go for ruled as well. Only in case of labor law, I'm telling. It is only applicable to the labor law subject. Okay. Apart from labor law, you have to follow the rules of the college. Okay. And in case of assignment, even in case of assignment, you can go for in case of assignment, since it is inspected by the authority, inspected by the what you call core committee of the university, you have to follow the uniformity. Means it is my request that assignment, you write it in a white A4 sheet, that is one-sided. And in case of test, either of them, you can go for white as well as you can go for ruled sheet. It is your wish. Kannada medium students are ಅಸೈನ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಏನೈತಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನ ನೀವು ಕಂಪಲ್ಸರಿ ಆಗಿ ಏನ್ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಾರಲ್ಲ ಅದು ವೈಟ್ ಶೀಟ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅದರಲ್ಲೇ ಬರೀರಿ. ಬಟ್ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಏನೈತಲ್ಲ, ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಕೆಲವೊಂದ್ಸಲ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಅವೈಲೇಬಿಲಿಟಿ ಇರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲಪ್ಪ ಅಥವಾ ವೈಟ್ ಪೇಪರ್ದ ನೀವು ರೂಲ್ಡ್ ಶೀಟ್ ದಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೀಬಹುದು. ಅದು ರೂಲ್ಡ್ ಶೀಟ್ ದಲ್ಲಿ A4 ಇರ್ತೈತಿ, ಲಾಂಗ್ ಶೀಟ್ ಇರ್ತೈತಿ. ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಯುವರ್ ವಿಶ್, ನೀವು ಯಾವ್ದ್ರಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಬರೀಬಹುದು. ಓಕೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನೆನ್ಪ ಇಟ್ಕೋರಿ, ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಬರೀಬೇಕಾದ್ರ ಸುಳ್ಳ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ, ಬಯೋಗ್ರಫಿ, ಜಿಯೋಗ್ರಫಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬರೀಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಡ್ರಿ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಅನ್ನ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋರಿ. ಏನ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಐತ್ಲ ಅದಕ್ಕಷ್ಟ ಆನ್ಸರ್ ಬರೀರಿ. ಸುಮ್ನೆ ಮನ್ಯಾಗ ನೋಡಿ ಬರೋದು ತಗೊಂಡು 10 ಪೇಜ್ ಬರ್ದೆ, 12 ಪೇಜ್ ಬರ್ದೆ, 10 ಪೇಜ್ ಬರ್ರಿ, 12 ಪೇಜ್ ಬರ್ರಿ. ಕ್ವಶನ್ಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ತಾವಲ್ಲ ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಕಡಿಮೆನೆ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರ, ಅಷ್ಟು ಕೊಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ ಯಾರು. ಓಕೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿರ್ತದೆ ನೀವು ನೋಡಿ ಬರ್ದಾರ ಅಂತ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡು. ಓಕೆ. ಸೊ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಎಷ್ಟೈತಿ, ನಾ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬರಿಬೇಕು ಅದನ್ನ ಒಂದ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತಲೆಗಿಟ್ಕೊರಿ. ನಾ ಏನೇನು ಕವರ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಿದ್ರು. ಸಿ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಈಸ್ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಟ್ರೇಡ್ ಯೂನಿಯನ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೇನ್ ದ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಜರ್ ಫಾರ್ ರಿಜಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಅ ಟ್ರೇಡ್ ಯೂನಿಯನ್. ಅಷ್ಟ ಕೇಳೇನ. ಸೊ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಟ್ರೇಡ್ ಯೂನಿಯನ್ ಅಂದಾಗ ಒಂದು 10 ಡೆಫಿನೇಷನ್ ಬರೆದು, ಆಮೇಲೆ ರಿಜಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಷನ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಜರ್ ಬರೆದು, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಇಮ್ಯುನಿಟೀಸ್ ಕೂಡ ಬರೆದು, ಜನರಲ್ ಫಂಡ್ ಕೂಡ ಬರೆದು ಹಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಕ್ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಡ. ಡೆಫಿನೇಷನ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದ್ 2 ಡೆಫಿನೇಷನ್ ಬರೀರಿ. ಪ್ಲಸ್ ರಿಜಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಷನ್ ಪ್ರೊಸೀಜರ್ ಏನ್ ಸೆಕ್ಷನ್ 3 ದಿಂದ 13 ಮಟ್ಟ ಐತ್ಲಾ ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲಾನು ಕೂಡ ಕವರ್ ಮಾಡ್ರಿ. ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಮೋರ್ ದನ್ ಇನಫ್ ಫಾರ್ 4 ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್. ಓಕೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ 3.5 4 ಮಟ್ಟನು ಕೂಡ ಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಕೊಡ್ಬೋದು. ಓಕೆ. ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಏನಪ್ಪಾ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯಲ್ ಡಿಸ್ಪ್ಯೂಟ್ ಏನ್ ಕ್ರಿಸ್ಟಲ್ಸ್ ಹೇಳಲ್ಲ ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಡೀಟೇಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಬರೀಬೇಕು. ಈವನ್ ಇನ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಶಾರ್ಟ್ ನೋಟ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ. ಶಾರ್ಟ್ ನೋಟ್ ಮುನ್ಸಿಪಲ್ ಕಾರ್ಪೊರೇಷನ್ ಇಸ್ ಅನ್ ಇಂಡಸ್ಟ್ರಿ, ಒಂದ್ 3-4 ಕೇಸ್ ಹಾಕಿ ಬರೆದ್ರೆ ದಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಮೋರ್ ದನ್ ಇನಫ್. ಅದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಬರ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಡ್ರಿ. ನಿಮ್ದು ಪಾಪ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ವೇಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳಕ್ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಡ್ರಿ, ಅನ್ನೆಸೆಸರಿ ಏನೇನೋ ಬರ್ತು. ಓಕೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಟೈಮ್ ನೋಡಿ ನಾ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಹುಡುಗರ ನೀವ ಬರ್ದಿ ಟಾಟ್ದಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಏನೋ ಕೇಳೇನೋ ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲಾನು ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಬರ್ದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಾರ. ನೇಚರ್ ಆಫ್ ಟಾಟ್ ಕೇಳಿದಾಗ ಎಸೆನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ಸ್ ಬರ್ದಿರಿ, ಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಎಲಿಮೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಬರ್ದಿರಿ, ಹಂಗ್ ಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ. ನಾನು ಏನ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಕೇಳೇನಿಲ್ಲ ಅದಷ್ಟ ಉತ್ತರ ಬರ್ರಿ. ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಮೋರ್ ದನ್ ಇನಫ್. ಓಕೆ.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
ಎಸ್. ಸೊ ಬಹುಶಃ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ರೂಲ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿರ್ಬೇಕು. ಅದಾದ್ರೂ ಸಬ್ಮಿಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು. ಓಕೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ಯು ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಟು ಸಬ್ಮಿಟ್ ದ ಹಾರ್ಡ್ ಕಾಪಿ. ಹಾರ್ಡ್ ಕಾಪಿ ಒಂದ್ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಓದೋ ಹಂಗಿರ್ಲಿ, ಅಷ್ಟು ನೀಟಾಗಿ ಬರೀರಿ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಮನೆಯೊಳಗೆ ಇರ್ತಾರೆ, ಈಗ ಟೈಮ್ ಬೌಂಡ್ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಾನು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಈಗ ಹೇಳೇನು, ನಾ ಅದ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಕೊಡ್ತೇನೆ, ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೇಮ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಪೇಪರ್ ಈಗ ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಬರ್ದಿಡ್ಬೋದು, ನೋ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್. ಹೆಂಗಿದ್ರು ನೋಡೇ ಬರೋದ್ರೆ ಆ ದಿವ್ಸ ಬರೋದೇನ ಇವತ್ತು ಬರೋದೇನ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸೇಮ್. ಓಕೆ.
Okay, ma'am.
ಓಕೆ. Shall I
Ma'am,
class?
we should send a soft copy.
Yes.
Ma'am, soft copy.
ಸಾಫ್ಟ್ ಕಾಪಿ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅದ ದಿವ್ಸ ಕಳಿಸ್ರಿ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಕಾಲೇಜ್ ತೋರಿಸ್ಬೇಕಲ್ಲ.
ಅಲ್ರಿ ಮೇಡಮ್, ಮೇಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕೇನು ವಾಟ್ಸ್ಆಪ್ ಕಳಿಸ್ಬೇಕ್ರಿ?
ಮೇಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಸರ್.
ಓಕೆ ಮ್ಯಾಮ್.
ಮೇಲ್ ಐಡಿ ಕಳಿಸ್ತೇನ್ರಿ ಆಮೇಲೆ. ಹಾ.
ಓಕೆ ಮ್ಯಾಮ್.
ಲಾಸ್ಟ್
Okay,
ಟೈಮ್
ma'am.
ಮಾಡಿದ್ರ ನೀವು ಟಾಟ್ ಈಗ?
ನೋ ಮ್ಯಾಮ್.
No, ma'am.
ಟಾಟ್ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ನೀವು?
Regular class, ma'am.
ಓಕೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದ ಬ್ರದರ್ ನೀವು. ಓಕೆ ಫೈನ್.
Okay.
ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಟೈಮ್.
ಮೇಲ್ ಐಡಿ ಕಳಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಓಕೆ.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for sending email.